With me is Paul Raymond Hunter, who is a professor in medicine at the University of East Anglia, and Nicola Stonehouse, who's a professor of molecular virology at the University of Leeds. Thank you both for joining me. So first of all, if we start with you, Paul, have there been any reports of actual cases of polio? This has come from Christine, so thank you for your question, Christine. Paul?
No, there's certainly been no cases of paralytic polio, and as far as I'm aware, there's not even been any positive samples from humans at the moment.
And Nicola, if we could just get a bit of context, this is a question that's come from Ricky and a follow-up question from Patricia Ann, which is, what is polio and what are the realities of living with the disease?
So it's a viral disease, it's spread through contaminated food and water, and generally the virus infects the gut. And it often causes no symptoms at all, but occasionally the virus can target the nerves. And if that happens, it can result in paralysis and also it can be fatal. And indeed, before vaccination, the polio infection was the primary cause of such disability worldwide. So it shows you how far we've come since vaccines.
Well, absolutely. And actually, the fact that it's not been around for decades has led to one of our other questions here, which is, how would I know if I have the virus? Would a GP know what to check for, given that the virus hasn't been around for decades? Paul?
Unless you are developing the neurological symptoms, it's highly unlikely that anybody would even bother to look for the virus. 95% of people who are infected, even with the wild-type virus, have no symptoms whatsoever. And with the vaccine-derived virus, that is substantially less. So and that's the issue here, that I think the people who are clearly infected because it's appearing in the wastewater are unaware that they are infected.
Nicola, we've had a question from Jeremy who says, I had my polio vaccine oral in the 1970s on a sugar lump. Am I still covered?
Yes. So many of us had the oral polio vaccine on a sugar lump. That was what we were using in this country for many years. We don't anymore. But yes, you will be fully covered. It's the risk really is predominantly for people who haven't had the full course of vaccination, or in the case of some children who haven't actually been vaccinated at all.
Well, that leads us on to the main point of the news line today, which is about people being urged to check that their child has had the vaccine. Paul, a question we've had is, how do you do that? How can you check that your child has had the jab?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think your GP should know, and within the UK, we generally give the polio vaccine through school-based campaigns. So if you've had the school-based campaign, your child, and you didn't remove your child from that, your child has almost certainly had that. But the part of the problem at the moment is that because of COVID and because schools have been closed, some of the child vaccination campaigns have actually been a bit more difficult to implement than under normal. So it is plausible that some children at least will have missed out because of the problems with COVID. And I think, you do need to contact your GP to see whether or not if you're not sure, to see whether or not your vaccines are up to date.
Well, one thing you mentioned there in the latter part of your answer, Paul, is something that goes towards answering a question from Susie. Nicola, I'll put this to you. Susie has asked, how has this happened? Because weren't all children vaccinated through infancy, and don't all babies get routinely vaccinated for polio? So is it the lockdown pandemic situation that's meant that some have been missed?
I think that's the risk, and the worry is that some have been missed. And of course, some people elect not to have their children vaccinated, and people miss appointments for all sorts of different reasons. But the reason this has been detected is because this will be somebody coming into this country, because this will be a person or persons who've had the oral polio vaccine probably quite recently, much more recently than the 1970s, going back to an earlier question. So this could be somebody visiting, being on holiday, or indeed someone who's moved to the UK. So that's what we're looking at here.
So just to follow up on that, Nicola, how come it was detected in the first place? Is it that scientists are always checking for viruses?
Absolutely.
In sewage?
In sewage, yes. So sewage sites are monitored for polio and other viruses routinely in this country and other countries, and we have great surveillance, and that's one of the reasons why we can pick these things up. It's very, very sensitive, so you can pick up polio that could have just come from a single person. Very sensitive, and that's why we're able to therefore respond to this and alert people very quickly.
And Paul, Nicola mentioned earlier about the fact that there are some children whose parents may opt for them not to take the jab. Can you just give us a bit of context and background in terms of what the uptake is for the jab over the UK or just specifically for England, and also when children get the jabs?
Yeah, I mean, essentially there are 5 times in your life when you would normally get polio vaccine. You get it 3 times in the first year or so of life. Again, typically around about age 4 as you're going into school, and then again in your early teens or mid-teens. And then that should be enough for most people. Now, sometimes as an adult, you might still be offered polio vaccine, particularly if you work with the virus, if you've got an occupational exposure, or sometimes if you're going to a country where there's still wild polio virus circulating. But most people, if you've had that at any time in your life, that is enough for the time being. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for answering questions that have come in from our viewers. That's Paul Raymond Hunter, who's Professor in Medicine at the University of East Anglia, and Nicola Stonehouse, who's Professor of Molecular Virology at the University of Leeds.